Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I know so many of you are dealing with, and that is having a child who has ADHD and anxiety or OCD, or all three. And there are some extra complications and struggles that I think come with that combo. And I am starting to know this firsthand, unfortunately. But whenever I know something firsthand, you tend to get better podcast episodes because I'm living in the trenches with you. And so I'm talking from a personal experience. So I wanted to talk today about how ADHD complicates anxiety and OCD and what to do about it. But before we get started, a couple of announcements. First, I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD thankfully offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy. And luckily, they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. We're also in the middle of my free series, Self-Care for Parents Raising Kids with Anxiety or OCD. For those of you that are listening who have kids with ADHD as well as anxiety or OCD, you're going to need this. I know I do. My free series is not your typical self-care program. I go into things that you may not think of as self-care, but they are self-care. We talk about your mindset. We're actually going to talk a lot about that today, and you'll see why that's so important. So the first video, there's 3 videos in this series. The first one is working on those narratives, those stories, and those mindset shifts that are so important for us to show up in a more effective way for our kids. The second video, we focus on our physical health and how that is so integral to us being available for our kids. And the third video is talking about how to get an effective and non-toxic support system, which a lot of us don't have. And how do we get that? So we are into the second video in the series. Yeah, the second video actually came out today. I'm recording this ahead of time, and so I have to look at my calendar. But they're on demand while the series is happening. And so you can literally register for the series at any time while the doors are open and watch these videos. And they're 30 minutes long. They're not really time consuming. And then I do bonus live classes for each one. And you can watch those bonus live class recordings on the series website as well. And it's all free. So it's really fun and hopefully helpful. A lot of people take this every single time I offer it. And I love that because it kind of is good validation for me that what I'm putting out there is actually helpful. Register at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. If you're listening to this after this went live on July 30th, you can catch this series all the way up until August 3rd. So August 3rd or 4th. A lot of times we do replay the whole weekend. And so check it out still. All right, let's move into this topic because I do have a lot to talk about related to this. I've always been kind of uncomfortable talking about ADHD because I'm obviously not an ADHD expert. So there's my caveat or disclaimer before I get into this. I'm a child therapist, and so we have to be skilled in most areas working with kids, and ADHD is a comorbid condition with anxiety or OCD. So definitely done my time treating ADHD with those comorbid conditions. But it wasn't until recently that I had this epiphany. It really wasn't an epiphany. It was a diagnosis that made me, and then the epiphany came that I was dealing with ADHD on top of anxiety and OCD with my son. It was complicated because he did have some things that mimicked ADHD. He's always in his head, and he had to read and reread until he felt like he fully understood it. And I feel like now that might have been a combination of ADHD and OCD because he does have some just right minor themes. So I want to talk to you about how these complicate the clinical picture And then after the break, we're going to talk about concrete ways in how to help our kids. There's some extra things that we have to do, or different ways that we have to do things with kids that have this clinical presentation. So I always like to not only vent and teach you about how complicated it is, but I always like you to leave here with some concrete skills and things to practice so that we leave you with hope and some concrete ways to tackle these struggles that we talk about. So let's dive into this. I want to preface this whole episode with how ADHD can sometimes look like anxiety or OCD. And I did do it? It's not a podcast. Hold on, let me check. No, actually, it was an article that I wrote a really long time ago. I used to write articles and it was more of a blog before I had my podcast and YouTube channel. And I did write an article, the link between ADHD and anxiety and why anxious kids can be misdiagnosed with ADHD. And I will link that in the show notes because we're not going to really go into that today, but it can be misdiagnosed where a child does not have ADHD at all, because when they are doing mental compulsions or they're ruminating or they're what-ifing, they look distracted. They can't attend. They can't focus. When they're feeling anxious, they might be fidgety and restless, but it's situational to their anxiety. And so sometimes when they're taking those questionnaires and they're not really getting like an in-depth analysis or assessment, it can look like ADHD and could be misdiagnosed. Now, sometimes it's both. And a lot of times it's a really common comorbid condition. And so sometimes they feed off of each other. And so they are easily distracted, or they can easily lose themselves in their mind, in their imagination, or it's like it takes more energy to focus. And so it's easier for anxiety or OCD to get center stage, because when you're dealing with intrusive thoughts or anxious thoughts, it takes a lot of energy, even for a child without ADHD, to rein in their brain. And if you already have executive functioning issues and struggles with reining in your brain, then that's going to make it twice as hard to be able to rein in those thoughts. And so you're going to look extra distracted. Focusing would be extra hard. So those kids with ADHD without anxiety or OCD actually, ironically, would have an easier time than someone with anxiety, OCD, and ADHD. So for me, when I was going through what I wanted to talk about today, what I was realizing is that it just magnifies a lot of the struggles that our kids with anxiety or OCD are already having. And so they overlap. One other kind of more concrete area is what I was just talking about before in the introduction is, when we have kids who have just right OCD and they need to fully understand something or fully comprehend something, or they worry if they miss something, so they have to rewind. I have worked with kids who have to repeat their words. They have to reread. They have to rewrite. They have to rewatch over and over and over again. And I wonder if statistically, and I don't know there's no research that I know of on this, if a disproportionate amount of those kids have ADHD as well, because OCD is opportunistic. I say that all the time, and it will look for what you are already struggling with, or what you're already grappling with, or what you don't want to be, or what you don't want to do, and it will target that. So there's lots of people who have allergies, and then OCD will hook into that, and it will make it a compulsion, or it will make you do things far more than what maybe the allergist says. Worked with that a lot. Or maybe you do have a health issue like migraines, but then OCD will be saying, well, I don't want to get migraines, so you need to tie your shoes, in 2 knots, and that will prevent you from getting migraines. So it can take a legitimate struggle and make it an OCD issue as well. And I feel like it can do that with ADHD, where there isn't that clarity. I know my son used to always talk about how he felt like he didn't have a memory. And I fully thought this was predominantly OCD, where he would be like, I worry that I'm not going to remember things. And he would worry that he's going to forget what he has to say. But then OCD would kind of get in there and he would ruminate over that. Or he would feel like he missed something when he was reading, which he probably did because of his ADHD. But then OCD kind of hooked into that and would say, okay, you have to read things over and over and over again. And it would take him, he eventually stopped reading. He's like, I can't do it. It's just so much work. And I really feel like it was probably the combination now, I think I've used that as an example of OCD looking like ADHD, but now I ironically see that maybe they were teaming up all along. So that can be an issue. So I want to go through 5 categories that I feel people with ADHD often struggle with and how this impacts the anxiety or OCD journey. So I want to talk about impulsivity, self-regulation, low self-esteem, inability to tolerate discomfort at any level, and hopelessness. When I started thinking about the kids that I've worked with who have ADHD and anxiety or OCD, or all 3, and I think about my son, because now I've got a personal example. And, I love and hate when I have personal examples because I like it because I really get the struggle. And so I can do I can teach you better because I get it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. I don't like it because I'd rather teach you just from a textbook or from my experience reading things than actually having to live them, because that's not fun. But when I was thinking about my own experiences and my son's experiences tied with, the AT parenting community online and all the families I've worked with in my practice, those are like those are the biggest areas that I saw. It's not exhaustive. I'm sure there's other things I'm missing, but those are the ones that are the biggest struggle. So I want to go through them. We're going to first, in this first part of this podcast episode, I'm going to talk about how it magnifies anxiety or OCD. And then in the second half, we're going to go through the 5 areas again, and we're going to talk about what things you can do to tweak it. So let's go through them. And I think it's important to understand how it magnifies anxiety or OCD, because one of the things that I am starting to shift, if I throw myself under the bus, which I love to do, is how I was approaching my son in the past, and how, since he got the diagnosis, it's really shifted how I've started to approach him. And it's making a difference. And a lot of it is because I'm seeing his behavior now from a new lens. And even though clinically I had all this knowledge and expertise, even though I'm not an ADHD specialist, I'm a therapist, I have all this knowledge. But as a parent, it doesn't matter what you know, or clinically what you know, because I know a lot of you are therapists as well. But when you are in it and then you're experiencing it and then you see it from a different perspective, you're like, oh my gosh, now things are clicking in place. Not that the problems are any better, but things are clicking in place. And when we shift our perspective on how we see our kids' problems, we show up differently. I'm showing up differently than I did in the past, and therefore I'm being more effective. And that is what I talk about in my first video in my self-care series, is looking at our shift, looking at our narratives, looking at our mindset, looking at how we're viewing our kids' struggles with anxiety or OCD, and asking ourselves and analyzing and assessing which part of that story or narrative is helpful and motivating and empowering, and which of it is holding us back. And that's really powerful. And I'll talk about it, and you'll see as I go through this how that shift can be really helpful. That's why you could register for free and watch the first video. It's already been released. The second video was released today at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. Would love to go deeper with you on that one. But the first category, impulsivity. When you think of anxiety and OCD, you think of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, right? That we all have different responses to that overwhelm that anxiety or OCD can give us. But then if you think about adding ADHD on whatever level, because there's all different types of ADHD and how it shows up, we're going to just talk about it in very general terms today. A lot of times that fight or flight, not so much freeze, unless I think you're focusing mainly on ADD, but that fight or flight, at least in my home, is magnified. And so this can look like your child running into the street when they're panicking, or getting really aggressive when they are, cornered metaphorically or literally. And so the intensity of the fight or flight is so much more than when you don't have the ADHD component. And so that's one area that makes them much more difficult to work with because it can be a little bit more overwhelming and scary and hard to manage. And I know I have 3 kids with varying issues. The other 2, so I have 2 daughters and a son, the other 2 who don't have ADHD are different than my son. And I've always wondered, is it a gender issue? Is it just a genetic issue? Like, why can I do certain things with the other 2 for their anxiety, or for my younger daughter, OCD, and they're effective? Or you feel like you're moving and they're falling flat with the other one. And so you question, like, am I doing something wrong with that one? Or am I not showing up in the way that I can for that one? And what I'm having, the epiphany that I'm having is, it's the ADHD component that's making that one harder. And maybe you're like, yes, right? Thank you. That is what I'm dealing with. That is so much harder. And so it might even be frustrating if you are in support groups, or if you're in the AT parenting community, in my membership community online, or if you're seeing a therapist and you're like, other people are making this look so easy. Not all of them, but why am I struggling? Or why do I apply these things and it falls flat or it doesn't work? Well, if your child has ADHD as well, and this is also, there's other things I could talk about. There's PANIS and PANS that can make rages, or there is kids that are autistic that add complications. I am just staying in the lane today and talking about ADHD, but I do want to, let you know that I recognize that there are other comorbid conditions that also exacerbate and magnify these issues for sure. We're just focusing on ADHD today. So the fight or flight is big. That is a problem. The second one is the self-regulation, which these all kind of feed into each other. And what I've noticed in my own home is that there's less distress tolerance. So, and that's a struggle because with anxiety or OCD, one of the pillars of helping kids with anxiety or OCD is to help them learn how to tolerate distress. And so we purposely put them in situations where they are triggering their anxiety or OCD and learn how to sit with the distress and sit with the discomfort. And what I'm noticing is it's harder for my son to do that than other people without ADHD. And so the other thing that kind of comes with the impulsivity around self-regulation is big meltdowns, big dysregulation, 0 to 60, where you're like, what just happened? And that makes it harder to do exposures. It makes it harder to not give in to the anxiety or OCD when you're pulling back your involvement with the compulsion or accommodating the anxiety. That when you're doing things like the SPACE program, Ellie Leibowitz's SPACE program about systematically pulling back your accommodations that feed anxiety or OCD, the child who has ADHD on top of it will have sometimes a harder time handling that. They become dysregulated. They can become really aggressive or self-harming. And so managing that becomes a lot harder. So we covered impulsivity, that's self-regulation. The next one is low self-esteem. Now, anxiety and OCD takes a hit at self-esteem as well, for sure. But when you add in ADHD, and I've always wondered this about my son, I'm like, I feel like my girls have, everyone has, I think, self-esteem struggles, especially as you're going through puberty and young adulthood. It's just a normal, almost developmental stage to struggle with your identity and how much you believe in yourself and who you are. But I think ADHD does add another layer to low self-esteem, because when you have ADHD, especially undiagnosed ADHD, or people who don't know you or understand you, people can misconstrue your struggles as you're lazy, you're selfish, you're dysregulated, you're volatile, you're unpredictable. You say things that you shouldn't say. You touch things you shouldn't touch. You're annoying. You can't get through things. Like, just do your homework. Just be quiet. Just clean your room. So teachers can get annoyed. Peers can get annoyed. Parents can get annoyed. And then the person who's dealing with it is like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do my homework like every other kid? Why is it taking me hours? Or why can't I clean my room like my sister can? Or why can't I handle this like other people can? Or why can't I remember this? Or why can't I focus? And that hits the self-esteem of like, why am I struggling? And I feel like with kids with ADHD, we are more likely to say things like, just do it, or don't be lazy, or you just need to put your mind to it, or just focus. And we're all human, and we say those things because it is so frustrating. But it does add that layer of low self-esteem. And even if we are like, just knocking it out of the park with our responses to our kids, it doesn't mean that society won't have those things to say to them. And even if that wasn't happening, which is impossible, they recognize their own deficits. They recognize that it's harder for me to read this passage, or it's harder for me to get this work done, or it's harder for me to sit here, in this silent room or whatever. That's hard. And so that hits the self-esteem for sure. The next one is inability to tolerate discomfort. And this is similar to low distress tolerance, but I made it a different category because I feel like it's a different thing I want to talk about. I have noticed with my son, and maybe this resonates with you as well, that he can't tolerate discomfort on any level. He feels uncomfortable in his body. So if he's sitting there, he's got a pillow, or he's propping himself up, or he's sitting upside down in his chair, he can't get comfortable in his body. But then if he's always too hot, he's always too cold. If we are in a place, like we just were traveling, and it was really hot and humid out, and we were all dealing with the humidity, but he was dying, like it was a nightmare for him. Or if he's wet and he can't get out of his bathing suit, he's dying. And we're all in a wet bathing suit and we're uncomfortable, but he can't handle it. And he does not have sensory issues. My oldest has sensory processing disorder, and she can handle it. She's older, she's 20 and he's 14, but he can't. And a lot of times I'll say to him, you can't handle any discomfort. If he's uncomfortable in any way, it's a big, big deal. He feels it big. And I feel like that is, again, a component of some kids with ADHD, that they just can't handle. It comes back to the dysregulation, I guess, that they just can't handle the discomfort that anything brings them. And so they become kind of harder to deal with because everything is upsetting. And the last category is the hopelessness and the give up attitude. And I feel like a lot of kids with ADHD, because it takes so much more brain power to get a task done, a non-preferred task done, right? If it's a preferred task, no problem. And I know a lot of people are kind of like, why is that? Like, why can my child spend 10 hours on Roblox or Minecraft building this like intricate thing online, or building these beautiful Lego sets, or doing this incredible art, or whatever they're into, and they can't apply the same focus to their schoolwork? And that's because it's a non-engaging activity for them. And so it does require extra brain power for them to focus in general. But when it's something they're engaged with and enjoying, there's an enjoyment loop, and so they're getting something from it. When it's a non-preferred activity, there's no natural incentive, there's no enjoyment, and so it takes them so much more energy. And so they have an attitude of giving up before they even start. And so my son recently, last semester, went into online schooling, and this is really when I actually ironically noticed his ADHD, because I was with him 24/7 and I was having to deal with him getting through his schoolwork. And he's a straight A student, and so I never saw the struggle. But when he had to do things on his own, he had to read everything. He didn't have any teacher guiding him. And it was at a higher level because it's a university program. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going back to school. I'm having to do a lot of the work, because he would give up before he began. He would read a little bit of it and he'd just be like, I can't do this. And I would look over and all of a sudden he's upside down in his chair with a blanket over his head. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it's like, it's too much. I just can't do it. I can't do this online program. I can't, it's giving up really fast. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, where it's frustrating because at every step, whether it was learning to tie their shoes or learning to be potty trained or learning to write, there was this level of frustration and hopelessness that would ooze out of them, And so you had to break it down into smaller steps and really encourage them more than you would another child who doesn't have ADHD. And so that also impacts anxiety and OCD, because their attitude or their hopelessness really is the fuel to whether they are going to be motivated to work on anxiety or OCD. So if it's hard, and we go back to the inability to tolerate discomfort, we go back to the low distress tolerance, we go back to low self-esteem, they're not going to want to do exposures. They're not going to want to do brave challenges because they're not going to believe in themselves. They're not going to want to do the hard work because everything is hard for them and it feels like it's too much. And honestly, it probably is too much. And so what do we do with all that? Dealing with impulsivity, self-regulation, low self-esteem, inability to tolerate discomfort, and hopelessness, the give-up attitude. Well, after the break, I'm going to go through those categories and I'm going to give you a bone and talk about some things that we can do to try to help them navigate through it. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about the 5 categories that I wanted to go into today that often impact the comorbid condition of having ADHD and anxiety or OCD, and OCD, depending on what you're dealing with. So let's go through these categories and talk about some things that you can do or tweak to help your kids with that extra boost because of the ADHD. I do want to say that it's important to recognize that there is no silver bullet answer to this. And I feel like I have to preface that because it is hard. I want to validate that this is hard. And it's not oh, you're just not doing X, Y, and Z. And if you did X, Y, and Z, the Red Sea would part and everything would be great. I'm just a realist, and I like to sprinkle my support for you with some realism that, yeah, this is really tough. And 2, no magic fairy dust here. But there are some different approaches that we can tweak that can help the situation. We can make things worse by approaching it in the way that we might approach anxiety and OCD without ADHD. And there are things that we can do that can make it a little bit better. And that's my hope for you today, is that we can talk about things. And even if you get one takeaway from today and you go, okay, you know what, maybe I could do that differently, then that might help improve a little bit. So let's go through them. Impulsivity. This one's is tough. The fight or flight. And I'm really not focusing on the freeze or fawn, because I feel like with ADHD, it's the fight or flight. They're either really fighting, and now you might have a child that freezes, so I'm not discounting that, but I think the majority are going to be fighting, aggressive, really explosive, or that flight where they're impulsively taking off or they're leaving. And that can be really overwhelming. And so in those situations, it is really helpful to proactively script responses. When you're feeling anxious, let's talk about a plan. And a lot of what you're going to hear me say in this part of the episode is a lot of scripting and a lot of planning proactively ahead of time and a lot of practicing. And what I've noticed is with my other kids and other kids in my practice, I can teach them skills related to anxiety or OCD, and then I can let them fly and watch them practice it or implement it. But when you have kids with ADHD, there's a lot more coaching and hand-holding. I was trying to think of something nicer to say than hand-holding, but that's what came to my brain. Like, hand-holding is going to be part of the journey. And so it's this expectation of, I'm going to give you the tools, and then I'm not going to just abandon you and leave you. I'm going to have to coach you through them over and over and over again. Very much like we have to do maybe if we're dealing with them in English and they're writing a paper. We can't just help them find like the main idea and then walk away. We have to be like, okay, let's find the main idea and then come back. And now we're doing the step 2, and then we'll do step 3. And we have to like hand hold them through the process until eventually they practice it over and over and over ad nauseum. And then they learn it. They do learn it. It's not that they don't learn it. And I know my son used to always say, I never learned from my mistakes, or I never learned from anything. And partly I think his dad would say that to him a lot. So we can say things that are hurtful to kids, that you never learn from anything. And when he got the ADHD diagnosis, and prior to that as well, I would say, you do learn things. It might take you a while. It might take me a while, but you do learn things. And here are some examples of how you've learned things, that you do grow and you do evolve. But that goes back to the low self-esteem as well, right? That they start to create a narrative of who they are and what they're not capable of. So with fight or flight, coming up with a plan of what you can do. One thing that we have done with my son, and it has taken a lot of time, is that when he is upset, that he lets me know. We have done a lot, and we'll talk more about this in the next category of self-regulation as far as what he can do when he's going to explode. But he's had to learn that he can come to me when he's feeling overwhelmed or when he's feeling anxious. Now, part of the struggle in the past was that in the way that he would come to me, which would be with anger or overwhelm in such an extreme degree, that my responses were not welcoming. They would be like, it's just a bee, like, calm down, or it's hot for everybody, or, don't freak out when we get your blood test, like, calm down, it's okay. Like, because I'm worried he's going to make a scene, because out of all my children, he will make a scene. And so it was triggering for my social anxiety. And so what I've had to shift when it comes to his impulsivity is I've had to learn how to anchor myself. And we talk about this in my free series as well, how to lovingly detach and be an anchor. And so instead of adding my panic that he's going to freak out, or my anger, why is he freaking out, I had to anchor myself. And this is a complete work in progress. So as I'm telling you this is a daily practice for me. I have not aced this. I think that for a lot of parents, we never ace it. It's a daily practice. Some days are better than others. But when he is overly anxious and he's having an anxiety attack, where in the past, and even probably today, there are times where he'll bolt, he'll take off, or he'll hit somebody. Not just someone randomly, normally his sister, but he can get aggressive. So it's that fight or flight when he's anxious. Me validating and just sitting with his feelings and being a safe place, which I know sounds so obvious. Like, of course, that's what we want to do with all our kids. But in particular, kids with ADHD, then I'm like reinforcing that it's better to come to me, or that's your knee-jerk reaction is I'm panicking, I'm coming right to my mom. Not that we want to develop a codependent relationship, but self-regulating with kids with ADHD is a really important first step. Even with impulsivity is when you are in a fight or flight mode, come to me and I'll anchor you. And the way that we anchor them is we validate the struggle. I'm sorry you're having a hard time. We don't try to fix it because that'll make them angry. We don't try to normalize it because that will make them feel not heard. We just sit with the struggle. And I've been doing that for the past few months, more so even in the past few weeks. And there's been a huge difference. I've actually, he's gotten calmer faster. And even if he doesn't respond well, it feels better for me that I'm not getting angry or frustrated at him, that I'm empathizing. And initially, it really wasn't an authentic empathizing. It was like doing a lot of my own work to just anchor myself and give him a compassionate response, even though internally I wasn't feeling compassionate. Let's be honest. Sometimes we're not there. But over time, and this is new for me, it is starting to become more genuine and authentic because I realize he is struggling. And honestly, the more he responds well to that, the more I want to respond in that way because it's a reinforcing loop. So I am also noticing that I have to do more coaching in the fight or flight, a lot more validating. I know this is hard. Come and sit with me. Come and sit over here and we'll just sit here and, ride this out together. Those things can really help. All right, moving on. Self-regulation is very much tied to that. And I feel like that low distress tolerance requires one, more empathy, again, for sure. Also, much more scripted responses. I haven't had to do this with my other two children, where we've literally had to script how he would respond when he's dysregulated. And I go into this in my difficult behavior course that I have on how to teach kids to respond to their difficult behavior that's caused by anxiety or OCD. And then you topple on ADHD as well, how to respond in a way that is calming and conducive to regulating them. And that can take a lot of time. I actually do have a free webinar that you can take. Let me go look it up. That talks about how to handle difficult behavior caused by anxiety or OCD, and certainly ADHD sprinkled into that, the webinar will address. And so if you want to check that out, you can go to natashadaniels.com/difficult behavior. And it's a free webinar where I give you some suggestions on how to approach that much more in detail than what I'm going to be talking about today. But I also have a course that are videos for you and videos for your child or teen to watch. I have two different types of videos, one for little kids and one for older kids, on how to learn how to self-regulate. And you can check that out at atparentingsurvivalschool.com. And then I have like 7 or 8 courses. Just scroll through, look at the and you'll find difficult behavior course. But that could be helpful as well. That's what I did with my son, is I created zones. This is what I talk about in my difficult behavior class, where they are like safe places where he could go. And with a lot of kids without ADHD, we can create like these safe places for them to go and these coping skills for them to use. And over time, they start using them. But when you have a child where you sprinkle in ADHD, they could be oppositional or aggressive and impulsive, and they don't want to go to their zone and they don't want to do this. And so with my son, it took years, to be honest with you, of me hand-holding, his coping skills, what coping skills he has picked. He likes to throw ice when he's really frustrated. He likes to cover his face. He likes to bury himself. And so we looked at the ways that he naturally copes, and we built in coping skills around that. You like to cocoon yourself. You like to burrito yourself, and helping him identify these are the things that you do naturally. Let's identify them as coping skills. And so I talk all about that in my difficult behavior class, like how to do that. But now at 14, he will literally, And I don't prompt him to do this, but when he's really frustrated, he will take a blanket and he'll roll himself on the floor. He's burritoing himself. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. Or he will bury himself under the pillows. He's looking for the deep pressure. He's looking for, the sensory isolation and deprivation so that he could just self-regulate. And that has taken a lot of work. And we still have periodic episodes of meltdowns, but they are becoming fewer and fewer. And he's also on ADHD medication now, and that has really, really helped as well. Understanding that we're going to have to script their responses, and they have to be their responses that we script. We don't tell them this is what you're going to do when you're upset, and then why didn't you do the thing that you planned? They have to script it, so you coach them in scripting it, and then you have to cheerlead them through it. Let's say they rage, but for 5 minutes they didn't rage. Then we have to praise the 5 minutes that they held it together. And that's hard when, let's say you have a child who got really aggressive or said really harmful things, but for the few minutes before they really exploded, they used their skills. And because these are kids who have low self-esteem, who give up before they begin, we have to find the wins and really celebrate the wins, because when we just focus on what they did wrong, they become discouraged, even more discouraged than they already feel. And that's hard as a parent, because it's hard to praise or say, wow, you should be really impressed with yourself because you didn't really get really upset for a few minutes before you exploded. Or you exploded, but then you felt bad, you picked up the pillows, and you went to your room. And I really appreciate the fact that you cleaned up after yourself and you were able to go to your room. It's hard sometimes to find the window or the little behavior to praise, but it does go a long way. So that's self-regulation. I'm kind of going through these rather fast because I want to give you just a big view of how to get through these. Low self-esteem is another one. And I realized that the added layer of ADHD, which impacts the self-esteem already, makes it so much harder for them to feel good about themselves. Because I feel like ADHD really hits self-esteem because they are dysregulated, they're impulsive, people get annoyed with them. And then people with anxiety or OCD already have low self-esteem too often because they feel embarrassed or ashamed of their struggles. And so add the two together, and that's a tough pill to swallow. So as parents, we have to be extra sensitive to how we are offering structural criticism. We have to be extra aware of systematically praising effort, because the end product won't be there for a long time. And so praising effort, I like the way that you sat there and you tried to write that sentence. I know you got frustrated and you broke your pencil and you left, but I really like the way you tried. I saw that you were trying and you're making an effort. This does not come intuitively, because I wind up getting frustrated too, and I catastrophize, and I think, oh my gosh, we're never going to get through this assignment. We're never going to get through this year. We're never going to get through high school. You can catastrophize, but that's why this takes practice. That is why, not to keep talking about my self-care series, but that is why I spend so much time on mindset in the first video. Is a lot of this stuff does not come, and maybe it does for you, but for me, it does not come authentically. It does not come naturally. To praise someone when the end product is disastrous is really hard for me, because I don't have ADHD and I am more on the neurotic side. And so for me, things are easy. And partly my anxiety drives that. I am like a go-getter, and I'm not a perfectionist per se, but I strive for the best. And so that, also think about that as a parent. If there is this discrepancy between how you function and your executive functioning and your child's, you might even have less empathy and less understanding, because you're like, why is this so hard for you? I could knock this out in 10 minutes. And I've said things like that to my son. Like, this isn't a hard assignment. Like, I could get this done in a half hour. That's not being empathetic, because our brains are different. But it is harder for me to understand and put myself in his shoes because I don't have ADHD. And I'm really the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to that. So think about yourself. Is it hard for you to empathize because it's so foreign to you? Or conversely, you get it, and that also is hard for you because you don't want your child to be like you. We bring all sorts of things to the lens of how we view our children. We talk about that in my self-care series, which you could register for at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. I just don't want you to miss it. It's really good. So find systematic praise for effort. And you don't want to attach effort or praise to you and your acceptance. Like, I'm so proud of you. Now, you're going to sometimes mess up and say that. It's not like you're going to, ruin your child if you say that. But it is so much better when we say, wow, you should be really proud of yourself. Like, that was really impressive, because normally you don't even sit down and try to write a word or write the sentence out. And I saw you trying. So you should be proud of yourself for that. You should be proud of yourself. It's not related to my relationship with you. It's not, I'm proud of you when you try and I'm not proud of you when you don't. Nothing to do with me. You should be proud of yourself. That builds self-esteem, because we're putting it back on them. When we're praising what they did. I saw that you struggled. I saw that it was hard, and I saw that you persevered. That's impressive. You should be proud of yourself. Be specific. Highlight what skills or tools they were using that you noticed, and that can go a long way. There are some kids who don't like praise. If that's your child, then don't do it. It's okay. Or do it in a neutral way. Like, you got through that really fast. I'm surprised. I looked at the clock and I was like, wow, he's already done. That's impressive. That's like more of a passive praise. There are some kids with especially anxiety or OCD who don't like any praise. And there are different themes and issues that are centered around that. Then don't praise. But most kids will like praise on some level. The next thing related to self-esteem, and this is more so even with ADHD, is find their passion. A lot of times with kids with ADHD, they are really into one thing. They have a lot of attention and a lot of passion for the area that they're really into. And unfortunately, a lot of times this is things that we don't want them to be into. And so we may not want them to be into video games, or we may not want them to be into whatever. A lot of times it's electronic with kids with ADHD. And I do feel like, and this is just my opinion, so you might disagree with this, but I do feel like when you fight that, it's like you're trying to swim upstream. It's like encouraging that in a constructive way can be helpful. With my son, he's really into gaming, and he has tried all sorts of other things. He was into drumming. Now he doesn't want to drum anymore. He was into crafting, and he would make jewelry. He had an Etsy store. He doesn't want to do that anymore. I find that when he says he doesn't want to do it anymore, and I don't let go, then I am battling his energy and I'm swimming upstream. And then it becomes a self-defeating activity, because it's not helping his self-esteem when I'm making him feel bad that he doesn't make jewelry anymore, or making him feel bad that he doesn't go outside enough. We want our kids to be healthy, and we want them to have a very well-rounded extracurricular. But a lot of our kids with ADHD have a narrow interest in what they want to do, and they get very fixated on that. And for me, and this doesn't have to be you, but my style of doing that is supporting him in what he's already passionate about. And, he got passionate about making YouTube videos. He's not showing his face or anything, but he was learning CapCut. He was learning video editing stuff. And it was actually helping his self-esteem, because people were like, this is a great video. He was connecting with other people. Is that my preference for him, that's where his energy would go? Maybe not, I'm sure there's a million other things that I would like him to be more physical, and I would like him to be more healthy. But me nagging him about that and forcing him to do stuff like that is not going to float with him. And so I rather swim with the current and support him in other creative ways. Like, oh, I can get you CapCut if you want CapCut. I can teach you video editing if you're into that, because that's going to translate into something else. My older daughter is now she's in art school in LA, and she's learning. I think she's going to be a famous game designer. It can move into a career. So is there a passion that you can support? Like when he was into rocks, and he would wrap necklaces with wire, and I was like, let's go to Quartzsite, Arizona, because we live in Arizona, and buy you a bunch of rocks. And he wanted to sell them. I'm like, I'll set up an Etsy store for you. And so I was there to just support him with his flow. And, because I'm neurotic and type A, I got him business cards, and I got him packaging stuff. And then he was done with it, a few months later. And I was like, I just spent a lot of money and a lot of energy creating this store, but I had to let it go, because he was moving on to the next thing and he felt really bad about it. But sometimes with ADHD, they do move on, especially as kids. Their interests kind of wax and wane, and now they're not into something. We have to, in my opinion, I have to respect that for him. The next thing I want to mention is normalizing and educating about ADHD and anxiety and OCD. I know for my son, the moment, first of all, he has been asking to be tested for ADHD a big bulk of his life. And I just didn't see it. I'll be honest with you. I just didn't see it. I thought it was all anxiety and OCD. And he was very good at masking, and he's very high functioning around things like that. He's gifted. And so he was getting straight A's. I just didn't see it. And a lot of the things that were ADHD, I thought were, I'm going to be totally honest with you, just annoying parts of his personality. I thought he was like, he just liked to poke the bear. He liked to be impulsive. He was harder to rein in. And I just thought that was just part of, he's my only boy. I thought part of it, that was just, having a boy. I have 2 girls. And I thought a lot of it was just anxiety energy. I was wrong. And so he was always asking. And the other thing I thought of is like, well, if he's diagnosed, I'm still not going to give him a stimulant because that can make his anxiety or OCD worse. A lot of times stimulants can make anxiety or OCD worse. So I was like, and he has ARFID, restrictive eating. And so there's no way I'm going to give you a stimulant when you're about to be G-tube because you don't eat already. And so part of it I thought was kind of futile. But when I did eventually get him diagnosed, because once he went online and we were in the trenches together, I was like, oh my gosh, like something is seriously wrong. And I feel really bad that I didn't validate his struggles and concerns a long time ago. We all have parent guilt about those things. We're going to miss things. So when he got the diagnosis, his self-esteem improved drastically overnight because he was able to see that this is not me. I'm not annoying. I'm not impulsive. I'm not unable to do my schoolwork. This is a struggle I'm having. This is a disorder, and it doesn't mean that I'm lazy or a horrible person. And I heard him telling a lot of people that he's friends with online that he has ADHD, that he was just diagnosed with ADHD. Like, he's not embarrassed by those things because, he's my kid. So we make sure that those mental health things are not embarrassing. But and then other kids were like, I have ADHD too. And they're like, oh, you do? Oh, and he was like really bonding with other kids about this diagnosis, and he was trying to help them. And it really improved his self-esteem overnight, because now he'll just say, and I know some parents will think, oh gosh, he's just using it as an excuse, but he'll say, I'm sorry, I'm trying, but it's my ADHD. And I do feel like it gives him another leverage. Not that we excuse that behavior, but it's a way to communicate. I'm struggling and I'm really trying, but it's hard for me not to tap right now, or it's hard for me not to move my legs, or it's hard for me not to. He's always been really hard to sit next to in a movie theater, on an airplane, because he doesn't stop moving. I know, it's really obvious now. You're like, okay, Natasha, duh, why didn't you have him tested? And he did gain weight on Zyprexa for his ARFID. And so he's got plenty of weight that he could actually lose, ironically, now that he's on Zyprexa. And so we were able to give him a stimulant. He's not consistently taking it, but when he does, he says he notices a huge difference. And I noticed a difference when he was trying to do schoolwork and he was on a stimulant. And so far, I have not seen it increase his anxiety or OCD or impact his eating, but I think that it's a little too early to say. But because he's already on Zyprexa, that makes him hungry. I'm hoping it'll balance it out. He's on a very small dose of both a stimulant and Zyprexa, super small dose, but he's very sensitive because he has PANS, which, a lot of kids with PANS have anxiety, OCD, and ADHD type of behavior. So, and ARFID, right? So not surprising that it's showing up like this, but him identifying that the struggles are due to ADHD and anxiety and OCD have been really helpful. And we don't let him use that as an excuse, but I don't say, well, you can't use that as an excuse. We all have to do hard things. I just say, I know it's a struggle for you. And it is also annoying your sisters. So can you tap on your pants and it won't make a clicking sound? Let me redirect this annoying behavior in a way that isn't going to bother other people, or where you can function better. So the next category is the inability to tolerate discomfort. And that has been like basic discomforts. I'm not talking about just the discomfort of anxiety or OCD, but I'm too cold, I'm too hot, I'm too tired, I can't walk in this water, I can't, because we travel a lot and we do a lot of, I don't want to say daring things, but like we'll snorkel or we'll hike in the rainforest, or we will, and I see that he really won't ever do stuff like that when we're home. Not like we have a rainforest at home, but like he won't purposely seek out adventurous things. Although I do have him signed up for a teen self-confidence program, and she always picks like really adventurous things that push him to his limit. But our travel is really boot camp exposures for his anxiety, OCD, and ADHD, because he has to learn to maintain his energy. He has to do really hard things. I guess we do things that can be perceived as hard for some kids. Swimming in an ocean would be hard for a lot of kids with shark fears. He's afraid of everything. So, and eating a lot of different kind of food. So he has to tolerate a lot of discomfort. One thing that I've been working on is my empathy, because we were recently traveling and I did say to him in a bad moment, I said, we're all hot, because he was having basically an anxiety attack about the bees and the heat, and he was going to pass out and he was overwhelmed. And I said, we are all hot. We're all experiencing the same temperature that you are. And we all see the same bee. And there aren't that many bees. Like you saw one in the entire time that we've been out here. But about an hour later, as he's like spinning out of control, I realized I have to be more empathetic, and that he does feel these things on a deeper level. It is harder to him mentally. Like he's feeling it. Like I'm able to tolerate it. And I told you I'm a work in progress. And so I became more empathetic. Like, I know this is hard for you. All right, let's go. We're going to go back to the boat. We were on a cruise. We're just going to go to one more booth, because we were at like an arts and crafts. It was kind of like a festival, and it was a bunch of craft booths, which is my thing. I love like local artists and local foods. And so we were loving it. He was hating it. And so I had to compromise. I'd be like, we're just going to go to 2 more, and then we'll go back to the boat. And I kept pushing it a little bit more to see how much farther can he take it. Can we just go to 1 more, and you can sit on the curb? So some of it is accommodating. We don't accommodate anxiety or OCD particularly, or we have to systematically pull that back. But when we're talking about just this overall inability to tolerate discomfort, some of it is empathy and realizing when we're pushing them too far. Or for him, I might go out of my way to make sure that I have things that will make him comfortable, because he is much more uncomfortable. And so I will buy him like an extra pillow for his seat when he's at school, or because he's at home at school, or things like that, to go out of my way to make sure that he is kind of accommodated for in that way. And then I coach him when he is uncomfortable, that he can get through it, and I like when he was really hot, I was like, face the wind and feel the coldness of the wind. Sometimes this falls flat, but there's so much coaching that has to come with a child with ADHD. Okay, my last thing I want to talk about is the hopelessness, the give up attitude. And again, compassion. I think compassion is really my number one message. And I know that's not really like a great aha rocket science like takeaway from today, but that's been a game changer for me. I've never really met him with a lot of compassion, to be honest. Like especially the stuff that's ADHD related, the impulsivity, the dysregulation, the aggressiveness. Never met that with compassion, because it's really hard to meet difficult behavior with compassion. But I am starting to, and what I'm noticing is he responds so much better. His self-esteem responds better. He de-escalates quicker. I mean, this is not a shocker, right? But it is so hard to do, for me at least. The other thing is I will give him small bite-sized goals and do a lot more scaffolding for him, whether it's related to anxiety or OCD or ADHD. And so if we're doing exposures, they'll be much smaller and more hand-holding, like me walking through it with him and, making sure he does it. We're at a point where now he will ask me to do exposures, because he's very motivated by the incentive of what he's going to earn if he can get his dental x-rays done next week. And so he wants to practice because he's motivated. And finding that motivation is really, really helpful with kids, in particular with ADHD, because external rewards do work very well with kids with ADHD. If we don't set them up for failure by giving them too big of a goal, they need very small bite-sized goals. And so even when we're talking about schoolwork or we're talking about facing a fear, it has to be in smaller increments because there is that give up attitude and that hopelessness. And so what I find with him is breaking things down in much smaller steps and giving him a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, for instance, when we were traveling, it would be like, we are going to just go to one more booth and then we're going to leave, right? That's really delaying the avoidance, letting him sit in it, but giving him that hope. And then the next day after that day, which was a nightmare, to be honest, we went to another place where there were a lot of bees or wasps. It's really wasps and bees that bother him. And he did not freak out as badly as he did the day before. And he actually even came up to me and he said, Mom, I'm handling this really well. Like, there was a bee right there and I didn't do anything. And so that compassion of me being compassionate to him and then him recognizing his own strengths and wanting to come and tell me was a really good sign of how when we praise them and we give them these small increments, they can build up to it. And so us leaving the day before earlier than what we wanted, but having him delay his avoidance and praising him, you handled that really well. I know that was really rough for you, even though his sisters were like, oh my gosh, this is such a nightmare. We wanted to just shop. It's like me doing a little coaching with them too, behind the scenes, and saying, hey, you have to have some compassion, or can you have some compassion? Because this is like special needs stuff. He doesn't want to be like this. This is a struggle for him. And this is hard already for him. And then when you add, your negativity, it just makes him feel worse. And it's I add negativity as well. And I say that to my kids, like, I know I'm having a hard time. It's hard for me too. I want to continue shopping and I don't want to leave, but he has been sitting there fearful for like 30 minutes and we've made him delay going back to the boat. So working on compassion with your family members as well can be really helpful. Now, I know all of this is so hard, and sometimes I knock it out of the park and sometimes I don't knock it anywhere. I completely fail. You are not alone. The struggle is real. The daily struggle is real. But I do hope that me breaking it down in this way and kind of looking at it from a different lens offers a different perspective. And if you want to dive into how to learn how to anchor yourself, how to shift your mindset, how to get a better support system, join us in my series at atparentingsurvivalseries.com. I think for those of us that have kids with comorbid conditions, it's even more important for us. I want to say especially with ADHD, because those behaviors tend to be so much more stressful, overwhelming, and irritating that it's even harder to anchor yourself and to center yourself and to reset yourself and to reduce your own stress. So take advantage of this free series, atparentingsurvivalseries.com. It's almost over, so you want to sign up now so you don't forget. And I hope that you found this helpful. If you are finding my podcast helpful, don't forget to hit a star where you listen to your podcast. That does help, or even review the podcast. And I appreciate that. And find the sparkle in everything you do. I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.